China no longer uses divisions as its main fighting force. It uses combined arms brigades, similar to a US brigade combat team, but under a corps. A typical PLA group army consists of 6 combined arms brigades and supported by 6 support brigades. This transformation is massive. Yet outside the Pentagon, almost no one noticed. So let's do a deep dive.
For most of the 20th century, counting a country ground power meant counting its divisions. A division was the basic unit of national pride and battlefield mass, a self-contained army in miniature. With 10 to 15,000 soldiers, its own artillery regiment, its own logistics train, and a chain of command running from headquarters down through regiments and battalions, China People Liberation Army followed this model for decades, organizing its ground forces the same way the Soviet Union once organized its own. If you wanted to measure Chinese land power in 1985, you counted divisions and the number was large. By the early 2010, that number was already shrinking and few people outside defense circles noticed. The International Institute for Strategic Studies recorded the PLA ground force, maintaining 9 active armored divisions and 25 infantry divisions, either mechanized or motorized, on the eve of the reforms that would change everything. That is a far smaller baseline than the figures often repeated online, which recycle Cold War-era totals from a much larger and more fragmented force structure. The real story is not a force that shrank from 100 divisions to a handful. It is a force that had already been trimming its division count for years and was about to abandon the division as its primary building block altogether. The change came under a sweeping reorganization launched in 2015 and largely completed by 2017, one of the most significant restructurings the PLA had undergone since its founding. 2 separate layers of the old system were dismantled at once. 7 regional military commands were replaced by 5 new joint theater commands, spanning the eastern, southern, western, northern, and central regions of the country, while 18 older group armies were simultaneously consolidated and renumbered into 30 new group armies, each carrying a fresh designation from 71st to 83rd. In PLA terminology, a group army is a corps-level headquarters, the closest equivalent to a US corps. This was not a cosmetic renumbering, it represented a wholesale redrawing of how Chinese ground forces were organized, commanded, and deployed, replacing an older regional structure with a leaner set of corps-sized formations built for joint operations. Inside each of these 13 group armies, the old division layer was being systematically dismantled. According to the Pentagon own assessments and independent analysts, each group army now typically fields around 6 combined arms brigades as its primary maneuver force, supported by additional brigades for artillery, air defense, army aviation, special operations, engineering, and logistics. Estimates of the total number of active combined arms brigades across the force vary between roughly 78 and 84, depending on how independent brigades in border regions are counted. Multiple sources agree that this variation reflects differences in counting methodology and reporting year rather than any real disagreement about the underlying trend, which is that the brigade, not the division, is now the PLA basic building block. The logic behind this shift is doctrinal as much as organizational. A traditional division depended on a long chain of command, moving information and orders down through regiments before they ever reached a battalion, and it required enormous logistical support to move as a single body. That structure suited a strategy built around mass and depth, the kind of warfare the Soviet Union planned for across the plains of Europe. It suited China's own military thinking for much of the Cold War, when sheer numbers of soldiers and artillery pieces were assumed to matter more than speed or precision. The Combined Arms Brigade was designed to solve a different problem. Each brigade, typically numbering between 5,000 and 6,000 personnel, integrates tanks or armored vehicles, artillery, air defense, reconnaissance, and engineering assets directly into a single organic formation, according to open-source assessments of the 2017 reforms. That means a brigade commander can fight independently without waiting for a division headquarters to assemble the pieces, cutting the chain of command from a 4-layer structure of group army, division, regiment, and battalion down to a flatter 3-layer structure of group army, brigade, and battalion, with the regiment eliminated entirely. For a military increasingly focused on rapid, localized scenarios along its coastline and land borders, rather than a continental land war, that kind of speed was judged more valuable than the raw size of a Cold War-era division. Removing an entire layer of command raises an obvious question, one that any attentive viewer is likely to ask. If the division is gone, who exactly gives orders to a brigade on a daily basis? The answer is the group army itself, which now sits directly above the brigade with nothing in between. A group army is the closest Chinese equivalent to what Western militaries call a corps, a headquarters that once managed several divisions and now manages a standard package of brigades instead, typically 6 combined arms brigades for maneuver plus a further set of support brigades covering artillery, air defense, army aviation, special operations, engineering and logistics, each carrying a fresh designation from 71st to 83rd. In PLA terminology, a group army is a corps-level headquarters, the closest equivalent to a US corps. This makes the group army less like a large marching force and more like an assembler of task-specific packages. Instead of pushing a fixed division down a single road, a group army commander can now draw on a menu of heavy, medium, light, and amphibious brigades and combine them with the specific artillery, air defense, or aviation support a given mission requires. The brigades themselves are not free-floating or self-commanding units. They remain firmly subordinate to their group army and, above that, to one of the 5 regional theater commands. What has changed is not who is in charge, but how quickly that chain of command can act, since orders now travel from a theater command through a group army straight to a brigade, without ever having to pass through a division headquarters that no longer exists. What actually happened to individual divisions during this transition follows a pattern that can be traced unit by unit through open military records rather than remaining a mystery. The most consistent pattern documented in 2017 was a single division being split into 2 separate brigades, each inheriting part of the parent unit personnel, equipment, and history. The 149th Motorized Infantry Division is one of the clearest examples on record, split in April 2017 into the 149th Medium Combined Arms Brigade and the 150th Light Combined Arms Brigade. What makes this case especially useful for understanding the reform is that the 2 resulting brigades did not stay together. The 149th was assigned to the newly formed 76th Group Army, while the 150th went to the newly formed 77th Group Army, illustrating how a single division personnel and equipment could be split not just into separate brigades, but into entirely separate corps-size commands. The 1st Brigade typically kept the division original number, while the 2nd Brigade often took its designation from one of the division's most distinguished subordinate regiments. Amphibious units followed a similar pattern along China eastern coastline, where the stakes of any future cross-strait scenario made rapid. Self-contained landing forces especially valuable. The 1st Amphibious Mechanized Infantry Division was split in April 2017 into the 1st Amphibious Combined Arms Brigade and the 5th Amphibious Combined Arms Brigade. And once again, the 2 offspring did not stay together. The 1st was transferred to the newly formed 74th Group Army, while the 5th remained with the Group Army that eventually became the 72nd Group Army, splitting one division lineage across 2 different corps-sized commands on opposite ends of the new organizational chart. According to Dennis Blasco, a retired US Army officer and one of the most frequently cited independent analysts of Chinese ground forces, the broader 2017 reforms left the PLA Army with 6 amphibious combined arms brigades in total, distributed across the 76th, 73rd, and 74th Group Armies. That is a rare case where an outside expert aggregate figure lines up precisely with the unit-level evidence rather than remaining a rough estimate. Not every division followed the split in 2 pattern. Some of the PLA most prestigious formations were converted directly into a single brigade, carrying their reputation and lineage forward without being divided at all. The 127th Mechanized Infantry Division, long regarded as one of the best equipped and most celebrated units in the PLA history, became the 127th Combined Arms Brigade under the 82nd Group Army in April 2017, and today stands as that Group Army sole formation to carry an infantry lineage stretching back to the earliest days of the Chinese Communist military. Its history illustrates how reputation, not just size, could determine whether a unit survived the reform intact as a single brigade rather than being broken apart. Other units took a longer, more winding road to the same destination. What became the 160th Heavy Combined Arms Brigade under the 71st Group Army traces its origin back to a division that took part in every major conflict the PL fought after 1949, including the Korean War, before being reduced to a motorized brigade in 1998, disbanded in 2003, reconstituted in 2012, and finally reorganized into its current combined arms configuration in 2017. Similarly, the 79th Division became the 235th Mechanized Infantry Brigade under the 71st Group Army, adopting the number of one of its own storied subordinate regiments along the way. These layered histories show that the 2017 reform was often the final step in a conversion process that, for some units, had already been underway for 2 decades. Despite the scale of this transformation, the division as a formation has not vanished entirely from the Chinese order of battle. A small number of divisions remain active, generally in border regions. The 4th, 6th, 8th, and 11th Combined Arms Divisions in Xinjiang, plus the Beijing Garrison Guard Division for ceremonial duties, where high-altitude terrain, dispersed garrisons, and specific security missions have kept a heavier, more self-sufficient structure useful. Some analysts also point to a handful of divisions retained outside those border regions altogether, such as the Ceremonial Guard Division stationed in the capital, a reminder that a few formations were kept intact for reasons of prestige and internal security rather than frontline combat doctrine. Independent estimates of exactly how many divisions remain in total and what they are numbered vary between sources, which is a reminder that even well-informed open-source analysis has real limits when Beijing does not publish an official order of battle. What is clear is that these remaining divisions are the exception rather than the rule, confined to specific geographic and doctrinal niches rather than representing any retreat from the broader shift toward brigades. This uncertainty at the margins should not obscure the larger picture, which is unusually well documented for a modern military reform of this scale. Unit histories preserved through open sources, including the PLA-owned archived records, track the fate of dozens of individual divisions one by one, showing precisely when they were disbanded, split, or re-designated. That level of traceability is part of what makes the 2015 to 2017 reform such a useful case study, offering a rare window into how a major military restructures itself in the open, even without an official public tally from its own government. Taken together, these individual cases point to something larger than a simple renaming exercise. The PLA did not just make its formation smaller, it inverted the logic that had organized Chinese ground forces for generations, moving from a model built around mass divisions toward one built around modular, self-sufficient brigades that can plug directly into networks of sensors, drones, and joint command systems. That shift mirrors, without exactly copying, similar reforms Western militaries pursued decades earlier, when armies such as the United States moved toward brigade combat teams as their primary maneuver formation. For a viewer trying to make sense of Chinese military power today, the lesson is less about a single precise brigade count and more about direction and intent. Whether the current total sits closer to 78 or 84 combined arms brigades matters far less than the fact that nearly all of them descend in one traceable form or another from the infantry, motorized, mechanized, and armored divisions that defined the PLA for most of its history. China did not abandon its old army so much as compress it, reshaping decades of institutional memory into a smaller, faster, and more networked force built for a very different kind of war than the one its founders once prepared to fight. What changed is not just the size of the brick, but who lays the bricks. In the old army, the division was the factory that built its own war. It owned its regiments and rarely borrowed. In the new army, the group army, the corps is the factory. Each of its 6 combined arms brigades already carries its own artillery battalion, air defense battalion, and reconnaissance battalion. But for a specific mission, the corps commander can attach what he needs: a battalion of 155mm truck-mounted howitzers or 3000mm long-range rockets from his artillery brigade, a company of attack helicopters from his aviation brigade, or an air defense battery from his air defense brigade. The brigade fights alone, but it never fights unsupported. That is why Western analysts now describe a PLA group army less as a marching column and more as a plug-and-play kit of task-organized packages. The division used to decide how to fight. Now the corps decides what combination to attach.